innovation itself is fairly evasive, but something that is fairly certain is that you need a certain amount of expertise in any field to be able to reach a breakthrough past that. I would also argue that in fact happens with the intersection of business needs and cybersecurity.
Welcome to the Reimagining Cyber podcast, where we share short and to the point perspectives on the cyber landscape. It's all about engaging yet casual conversations on what organizations are doing to reimagine their cyber programs while ensuring their business objectives are top priority. With my co-host, Stan Wisseman, Head of Security Strategist, I'm Rob Borrego, Chief Security Strategist, and this is Reimagining Cyber. So Stan, who do we have joining us here today?
Rob, our guest today is Marco Pineda, former head of cyber technology and innovation at the World Economic Forum, and previously the European CISO at JP Chase. Thanks for taking the time to speak with us today, Marco. Can you expand on your background as well as share what you are doing today for our audience?
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Rob and Stan, for the opportunity. As you said, Marco Pineda, just previous to this, I was the head of cyber technology and innovation at the World Economic Forum. I cut my teeth early on in cybersecurity, actually along with Rob, back in the old days of the kind of the Wild West of the internet with Genuity. And we were one of the first enterprises to, for instance, sell managed VPNs and managed firewall technology. So I started with a system engineer over there, spent most of my career in finance, and after that moved over to Morgan Stanley, then for an insurance firm in the United States. And about 8 years ago, they moved me to become the asset management CISO of EMEA here in Switzerland. And then moved over to the World Economic Forum to try something different.
One of the things I read about in your background was, and some of the things you worked on at World Economic Forum, you guys put out an article in early 2020. In this article, you expressed the view that cybersecurity and the threat landscape would be reshaped by the greater global access to the internet that was occurring.
Yep.
And in the article, you encourage leaders to avail themselves on new knowledge and processes and tools to ensure responsible protection of data and organizational resilience. Now, Marco, do you think we reached that anticipated inflection point in 2020 that you wrote about, and especially after the pandemic drove
Absolutely.
even more people to the internet usage? And
Absolutely.
do you believe leaders are heeding your advice?
You know, it's about a year now since we wrote that article. Although there's a glaring absence, in fact, of specifically talking about the pandemic, a lot of what has happened, maybe not with the same drivers, but a lot of what has happened is in fact spelled out over there. Increased use of remote technology, increased use of mobile technology, not necessarily driven by 5G, but instead driven by, in fact, the pandemic and people working more from home and remotely. So absolutely, a lot of what my colleagues and myself spoke about in that article, in fact, have come to pass. Like it or not, we know that security professionals and business professionals, as we're going to be talking about the intersection of that today, have in fact been forced to deal with the necessity of securing what is now become one of the basic foundational technologies of their businesses.
So, recently at the beginning of February, the World Economic Forum released their global risks report, right? And one of the key aspects that kind of, at least I always look at the outcomes of that, is what the cyber impact is to the businesses and kind of how that's continued to elevate itself. And it's, I think, number 8 at this point in time as from a likelihood perspective, which is, again, just showing the reality of the impact, right?
Right.
If you go back to the report or the article that you co-authored last year, as we were just discussing, and you said, kind of, as we just mentioned, probably about 80% accuracy, which is pretty incredible. Mm-hmm. What, though, do you look at from that to kind of where we are now as the focused priorities, right? Have these businesses, as they've been moving digitally and kind of accelerated, right, that digital transformation requirement because of what happened with the pandemic? What are those top priorities you're actually seeing kind of that evolved over the past year, and then even a little bit of what's going into this year?
Last year, let's face it, it was a very, I'm going to be very understated here and say it was a busy year last year. Cyber, for better or for worse, was crowded off of the usual news landscape. So understandably, it's a little less visible. But in fact, those of us who have been keeping an eye of and who work in the field know that in a lot of ways, things haven't changed. And as a matter of fact, the increased use of online services, e-commerce, video conferencing, work from home, those have all just given what we call bad actors more opportunities, in fact, for their work. We're going to see more of that as it goes on through this year. And I guess as far as finding more opportunities for cybersecurity within businesses, will also do the same thing and increase the likelihood or the opportunity for such mishaps or for such actions to take place, so such bad actions to take place. In this year, absolutely, we're going to reach an inflection point, I think, as far as people getting more used to working remotely, people getting more used to doing more stuff online. Will also mean those people also include our so-called bad actors who may want to take advantage of those new opportunities.
It's not really a temporary change caused by the pandemic. This is a true change in how we're operating, how we work, right? And likewise, the bad actors are taking advantage of that remote access.
Absolutely. And you've seen this echoed with mainstream analysis of what's going on as far as the pandemic is concerned and society in general. How things, everything from how we study to how we play, to how we get together and work, obviously, are going to change and going to be more and more dependent on online technology. And if you aren't convinced that it happened before, you should definitely be convinced this year, but at this point, that it has in fact happened and to reach a tipping point. And we're so reliant on it now that the inverse, protecting that infrastructure, is more and more critical to the survival of our way of life.
And for the modern day CISO and CIO, what are the main attributes that they need to focus on, as well as if you think about the culture and the mindset that they need to bring to their teams to be able to meet the needs of the organizations to help them unlock these areas of opportunities, or just to be able to deal with and adapt to today's environment? Stephen
Johnson's kind of principle of, I don't know if you've heard of it, the adjacent possible sort of applies here. And, as the economist says, it's a kind of innovation itself is fairly evasive, but something that is fairly certain is that you need a certain amount of expertise in any field to be able to reach a breakthrough past that, right? So the adjacent possible is just getting to the cutting edge of your field to be able to see what comes next and what you can innovate for. And that's not possible without doing that work beforehand. I would also argue that in fact happens with the intersection of business needs and cybersecurity. And also that the best place folks for that would be CIOs and CISOs, who are very familiar with their own fields, but also need to have a good, almost expert, fluent understanding of the businesses that they support in order to be able to find those opportunities. And it's those intersections where you'll find the most fruitful sorts of innovations and possibilities and opportunities.
Can you give some examples?
Well, I'm thinking back to my Morgan Stanley days, which is the early 2000s, and some of our work with single sign-on back then. Essentially, what we did was through the organization, we found that people were logging in they had about 10 or 12 different applications at a time that folks needed to use. And because there wasn't any single sign-on, they would have to log on to them, sometimes several times a day. We figured that if we eliminated most of those logons and tried to get single sign-on where we'd have some trust carried on between applications, we could eliminate most of those logons. And in the end, which we actually did, we saved the company something like 16,000 hours per month, man hours per month of productivity, which across a 50,000 or so person firm is fairly significant. And it's one of those, unfortunately, to this day, rare occurrences or events that I've seen where cyber was able to make a direct visible impact on the end business itself. Now, I'm sure CISOs are listening to this and saying that, well, we have a direct impact on the business, but I think we all have to admit that a lot of times we're buried behind a lot of what needs to be done. We're doing the basic blocking and tackling, but not to overuse a kind of a sports metaphor, but even the linemen have to watch for touchdown opportunities, right? They always have to do that. So I think in this case, yeah, we're doing the basic blocking and tackling, keeping the business going, but we also have to keep an eye out for those opportunities where we can directly contribute to the bottom line.
I think, Marco, that's the key word, is opportunities, right?
Yes, absolutely.
It's that shift in the mindset of the CISO. And in essence, what happened with the CIO many years ago, right? That shift in the mindset of them having to not only look at how do we protect, how do we prevent incidents from impacting the business, but also as we see the new initiatives that we're working on for the business, what are those areas of opportunities that we can actually better influence, that it's going to do, kind of, let's say, it's going to provide us an opportunity to inject additional revenue streams into the opportunity that initiative is introducing us. It's going to provide better trust with our employees, with our consumers, and our third-party partnerships, right? Those are kind of the areas that they have to be putting their caps on and thinking a little bit differently.
Absolutely. Do I have a tool, or do I know of a tool or a system or process that can actually help you on the business side reach your objectives, reach your goals?
What are some of those different innovations that you think have some gravity to them to be able to actually be more of a opportunity we can take advantage of and put that cyber lens on it?
We can start with distributed ledger technologies, which, as you know, are I think the most famous right now. I would say implementation of DLTs would be blockchain and Bitcoin. DLTs are really at the very base, just distributed databases, a copy of which like all the parties have a hold of. Much of the ideal usage of DLTs is really in kind of low trust environments. Speaking with some folks in the shipping business and the commodities trading business, a lot of the ideas around this were, for instance, improving the efficiency of the supply chain. A lot of times right now in international shipping, if you're on a ship crossing the seas and you get into port, your bills of lading, for instance, a lot of times that's still on paper. You get into port, you get your dock, and there's this courier on a bicycle that essentially picks it up from you, bikes it over to the central office of the port. They do the paperwork and bikes it back to you. Now, imagine in that case, and this is the idea of a few CISOs in the business, is if we had some sort of DLT technology instead, where we were sharing ledgers across the board. Even before I got into port, the port itself would have access to these records because it's a DLT that they shared. And because of its nature, all parties are assured that those transactions are in fact sound and credible.
Hey, Marco, you mentioned privacy and the business is getting inundated, and I think it's going to just increase as far as the regulatory compliance requirements on data privacy issues. And what innovations do you see coming to help address this? I mean, we certainly see the challenges of old are still there, right? As far as discovery of what data you need to protect and then applying those protections to structured and unstructured data. But how can the cybersecurity technology support the business and being more compliant to these privacy regulations?
Well, I think the compliancy bit is already there. I think it requires work and it requires some careful kind of risk analysis. That's the amount of effort you want to put into, and which is really key, right? I mean, I think we've spoken about it for a long time, but I think that maybe that understanding isn't quite there, certainly beyond the cybersecurity, shall we say, area of an enterprise. That is, in fact, it is a risk calculation, how much effort, money, et cetera, resources you want to spend on that particular problem. On the other hand, and I think this is where it kind of helps that discussion, the CISO getting a seat at the table, for instance. I think quite interestingly, and maybe adjacently, the ability to bring extra value to the business, in fact, gets you more credibility at that table, right? So the reason I brought up privacy enhancing technologies is that my former colleagues at the forum, the finance group, came out with a great paper on the use of privacy enhancing technologies in finance. And they had several examples, but one of the interesting one was, for instance, fraud detection. A lot of times fraud gets difficult to detect once a perpetrator, for instance, crosses enterprises where they're using more than one financial institution to perpetrate their fraud, because those happen to be like separate data stores, if you like, right? Or data domains for good reasons. And you brought up compliance, right? Because I can't share that data because of privacy reasons, because of whatever regulatory compliance reasons, that data is opaque. And so that gives a bit more opportunity for malefactors to kind of cross that domain and be a little bit invisible. What you could do, though, like using some of these privacy enhancing technologies, is that you can share this data without divulging the data, which sounds strange, and it's kind of a bit to wrap your head around. But in fact, it doesn't allow, if you can imagine, if only I could see the other person's data without them divulging any of it and possibly creating privacy issues or exposing their business model, then that would be great, because then I can find this kind of fraudulent activity going on and catch these malefactors. And in fact, that is possible with a lot of zero trust and again, privacy enhancing technologies, which we'll find. So I think this is kind of the interesting bit, the part that I have a lot of passion for, is finding these sort of opportunities and really leveraging them. I think there's, to use an already overused term, there's a lot of money being left on the table, I think, by not trying to recognize these opportunities, not trying to leverage these opportunities.
I think you brought up a very key point, which is when you think about, sharing of the data within an organization, a single organization, even that's a problem, right? How do I share information in a secure fashion for different types of business purposes? Right. But solving for that, there's definitely capabilities to do that. The collaboration, though, across different verticals, as you're alluding to, right? That's where the real power comes into play. But it's also them having to feel comfortable,
yes,
right? To be able to do that with one another, feel
Absolutely.
that there's a good level of trust.
Absolutely.
And again, they're not going to have data that's relevant for them to, divulge information of, as you mentioned, but still the value of that collaboration is going to allow them to accelerate, right, their capabilities
Absolutely.
much faster. Well, Marco, very informative, innovative, which is what we're looking for, obviously, in conversing with you today. But I think the key, again, takeaway is that from a security community as a whole, especially at the CISO level, now is the time for them to really be looking at what those opportunities, as you referred to, are, and anything that's put in front of them, right? Where they can insert themselves. And then some more advanced things about acceleration for different companies working with the same vertical, right? To help move things along faster and still have that level of trust with one another. Thank you, Marco.
Thank you, Marco.
Thank you very much, guys. I appreciate the opportunity. It's a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Reimagining Cyber podcast. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you would like to have us cover a specific topic of interest, feel free to reach out to us, and you can find out how in the show notes. And don't forget to subscribe. This podcast was brought to you by CyberRes, a micro-focused line of business, where our mission is to deliver cyber resilience by engaging people, process, and technology to protect, detect, and evolve.